Okay.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us in Dion Leadership as we talk this morning about practical skills for communicating effectively in a virtual world. We have Steve Dion here with us this morning, and he is going to introduce our panelists that will be speaking. He is our founder and CEO. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to join us this morning. We will be spending no more than an hour together today talking about practical skills for communicating effectively in a virtual world. And before we get going, I wanted to introduce to you two of my friends and colleagues. We have with us today Cindy Miller. Cindy is a leadership expert, coach, and facilitator, and I've had the pleasure to working with Cindy for about 20 years. She's really sought after to be a facilitator and coach for many of Dion Leadership's leadership development programs, and particularly spends a lot of time in teaching leadership skills, management skills, and interpersonal effectiveness skills. So in today's discussion, we thought Cindy could add a lot of value to bringing her insight in communicating virtually in the context of how we manage and lead others individually and work with teams. Also joining me today is Barbara Bolt, and Barbara is an international facilitator, educator, and coach. She specializes in communication skills with global executives and managers. Barbara's lived and worked in Europe for 19 years, and I'm jealous to be able to say that she worked in Italy for 11 years and in Switzerland for 8, some of my favorite places. And she teaches at the corporate level and university level, and particularly has a talent to coach executives where English is their second language. And she's become an expert in how to craft clear communication messages, and recently wrote a blog for us entitled Delivering Engaging Online Presentations, and we'll be covering some of that content in more detail today. So I will give you a quick introduction today, and then I will turn it over to my two colleagues to lead our discussion. But to give you some context, so why are we doing this? Well, Dion Leadership has a vision to have every employee start every day excited and end every day accomplished. So we have a team of about 50 coaches and consultants that deliver these leadership solutions, and we understand how important communication is in doing the work that we do with our clients. So in terms of our solutions, you can see both in leadership coaching, communication is a large issue, and we've been spending a lot of time coaching leaders to communicate effectively. In our leadership development programs, in working with teams, in assessing leaders to join an organization, and in their culture activities, communication is a linchpin for effectiveness in all that we do in organizations. So as we looked at the topics, we decided that this really should be something that we should talk about and become better at. Some of the clients we work with are on the screen here, and you can see that many of these organizations are very large, multifaceted, matrix organizations, and many of our clients are talking to us now about how to communicate in a new virtual world and how to be able to engage a workforce that is working remotely. So today, and this may be different than some of the webinars that we do in our series, but today we're really focused on giving you some very practical tools and tips for you as an individual to communicate better in a virtual world, but also knowing that we have many talent development professionals on the webinar today to help you think about other ways in which you can help upskill your organization in being better at this as well. So related to this topic, one of the things that we know is communication is always a challenge. In every organization, communicating effectively across organizations, even when we're face-to-face, is a challenge. You can see from this graphic here, and this is one of so many different sound bites that you could pull, but the amount of time spent in virtual meetings has gone up exponentially. And our clients report that this is not a platform they use regularly. I still personally get into situations where somebody's logging onto Zoom for the first time or logging onto Teams, and they're still learning this, and they need to communicate effectively across an organization. We know that CEOs spend time regularly communicating, and that's one of the skills that they hone is town hall meetings. Well, one of the things we're hoping to accomplish today is to help you think about the chain of communicating from the top of the organization all the way down. And do you have functional leaders, line leaders that are able to not just hold a happy hour and talk informally, but to communicate business issues and strategies from the top of your organization all the way down through the line employee. And we realize that those skills are required now as we think about not just communicating new information, but connecting people in a world where they need to connect differently than they ever have before. So with that as a backdrop as to why this subject was important and what we're hoping to accomplish, I'd like to start by turning it over to Barbara Bolt, who can share some of her wisdom with us.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks for that introduction, and we'll get going here. So my message is about communicating messages virtually in a variety of different contexts. There are 3 basic challenges that people face when communicating, when presenting virtually. And I've just put all 3 of these on different slides here. So the first one is the fact that sometimes you can't see many of your audience. Like right now I can see 3 people, actually 2. I'm not seeing the full audience. So I don't know what all of you are doing out there. I don't even know, I guess maybe your videos aren't on in this context, which means I can't see anything that you're doing. And the basic rule of thumb is that if you can't see people, they're probably not listening to you. So that's my assumption right now. But we may be able to see a few people. We may be able to see in the gallery view, you can see people, but it's distracting. I don't know if any of you have ever had the situation where someone, thank you, Al, I appreciate your little message there saying you're listening. Great. Sometimes have you ever had the situation where somebody's doing something distracting in that little window? I gave a presentation a couple months ago, and a woman was actually changing the sheets on her bed while she was listening to my presentation. And I could see her there in the background fluffing, I'm just like, oh my gosh, get this woman off my video. And I couldn't move her. So that can be distracting as well. But in the case that we obviously can't see as much of our audience as we can in a live presentation. Number 2 is the fact that your audience may not be able to see very much or all of you. For sure, you're seeing me this morning like this. We kind of have these postage stamp images that we're working with. The guy in the middle, we can pretty much see his slide plus the postage stamp. The girl on the left is in speaker view for someone without any slides showing. So we can see the upper part of her body, and we can see her face very nicely, which is great. On the right-hand side, we have the image where they can't see you at all. And obviously that's sort of the case of the old webinar. What we used to call a webinar was when all you saw was the slides and there wasn't any of the speaker there. That's more rare now, it seems to me. However, it can be the case that people can't see you. So I've broken the tips up into tips for everyone, tips when they can see you, and tips when they can't see you. But there's still one more challenge. And this is the challenge of keeping the audience's attention. You can click one more, Stephen, it'll come, there we go. I love the one of the guy eating his breakfast, because I'm sure all of us have been on some kind of Zoom interaction where we've put our camera down and we are eating. And I do think it's better to eat when they can't see you than to eat when they can see you, unless there's been an agreement that you're all gonna be eating. But yeah, we look at all the things he's doing. He's got his phone in his hand. He's kind of watching the meeting and he's eating. On the left, at a minimum, people that might be texting, might be doing something completely different here on another screen. So we are challenged to keep people's attention. And I know Al's with me today. I really appreciate that. I hope a lot of the others of you are as well. All right, Steve, thanks. So the tips, we're going to start with tips that apply to any type of virtual presentation. This is just good practice on virtual medium. You can go to the next slide. The first one is to keep it short. I think all of us have had this experience of the meetings being too long or presentations just being too long. Even in regular presenting, no matter what the context, less is generally more. You want to focus your message. You don't want to give people too much information. But in the virtual context, this is actually even more of a thing. I don't know if you can stay on that slide for a minute more, please. I don't know if any of you have heard this term Zoom fatigue, but I've actually done a little bit of research on that. And it basically happens because in face-to-face communication, when we're with people, our brain is picking up on about 11 different types of cues in that interaction. How is the person's body turned? Do they inhale briefly like they're going to interrupt you? Eye contact, of course, is key. So our brain is always tuning into things in our environment. What happens when we go virtual is that the brain doesn't have access to all that information, but because your brain can hear and see the other person, it keeps trying. It keeps trying to tune in to all of those other factors, and it gets fatigued by that. It's frustrated basically because it can't get any more information, but it continues to try to get that. So that's why some of us, you may have had that experience of just being tired on a Zoom communication. And I know a lot of you are probably on meeting after meeting after meeting. That's what we're hearing about this working from home situation. So be aware that you're tired for a reason. You're tired because your brain is working hard. And also in the gallery view, that's even more fatiguing because our brain's trying to pick up information about a lot of different people, especially like the lady changing the sheets. Yeah, that kept my brain really busy. And so that is what the psychologists call continuous partial attention. And actually that would be something like trying to read and cook at the same time. So just think about how tiring that is. And that's really why we want to try to keep our interactions relatively short. Now you can switch. Thank you. Another thing to pay attention to in the virtual context is using lots of what I refer to as signposting language. This is banal language that would seem not so important, but interestingly, these little phrases like, for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to speak about, or that's all I have on this topic, now I'm going to switch to. These little words trigger in the brain to pay attention. So the more you can use the signposting language, the more you'll keep that audience engaged, and also you'll keep them with you. What's coming next? And Cindy and I are going to demonstrate this morning because I'm going to hand over to her. So you'll see some good practice. The most famous signpost, obviously, is in conclusion. That's when people really tune in. They get you right there. Another thing we can do in the virtual context is to use language to create intimacy with our audience. So this is the you and the your, or if it's a team context, the we, the us, the our. Using, instead of just saying a presentation, your presentation. Instead of a meeting, it's our meeting, or it's our project. So personalizing what we are saying actually can help to create some intimacy. And I know that Cindy's going to talk about this more in her part. My recommendation is to stand whenever you are presenting virtually. And that could be if you were the main presenter, if it's like a webinar or something like that, or if you're just speaking in a meeting. I happen to have a stand desk, so I'm always standing. But one of the reasons you want to do this is because of your breathing. You'll be able to project your voice and sound confident if you can breathe from your diaphragm. And if you're standing, you free that up. You basically aren't crunching it and leaning over or in any way inhibiting your ability for your breath to come through. So, and it also, I think, feels a little more natural. So stand when possible. I understand that if you're in a meeting and you're not the presenter or not the main presenter, you may choose to sit, and that's fine. But when you're speaking, make sure you're also sitting straight, sitting up tall from your pelvis on up to your shoulders. Another very key thing is to eliminate as many distractions as you can when you are on a virtual call or making a virtual presentation. For sure, you want your phone off or out of the room. You want to turn off email notifications. Have you seen that flying through sometimes on people's presentations? You want to avoid that, and the little ding or the noise that's coming through if you're not on mute. Sometimes you have to close windows and doors depending on noise in the household. There were lots of jokes early on in the lockdown about dogs coming into the room and kids and all of that. I know on the days when we have our lawn service here, I've got to shut the window and basically suffocate through my presentations so that that background noise is not distracting. I would recommend I always recommend preparing for a presentation, running through it, making sure that everything's flowing smoothly. But in the virtual context, it's obviously really important to make sure your technology works. Because if your technology does not work, you don't have a presentation. You're not going to be present with people. In in-person types of presentations, we can sometimes come up with another solution. If the projector doesn't work, we can write on a flip chart, or there are some backup type of mechanisms. But in the virtual world, things really have to work. So microphone, lighting, camera, the software itself, we have to test that stuff and make sure that you're very prepared. So that's that last tip, I think. We're going to switch now to tips for when they can't see you. And as I mentioned, this comes a lot down to voice, but there are a couple of other things I'm going to mention here on this first slide. When we're presenting virtually, we want to change it up and keep it moving a bit more than we might in a face-to-face context. You don't want to spend too much time on one slide. So you might split a slide. You might put part of the information on one and part of the information on another so that you can make that change, because in this context, this is what people see, and that slide change brings them back to you. So we usually say that fewer slides are better, but in the virtual context, you may want a few more. Involving the audience with polls, quizzes, annotating a slide, anything like that is a great way to keep people's attention. We opted not to do that today, actually, in the interest of time, because we've got 2 speakers. But those kinds of things are easy to enact these days. They're built into most of these softwares, and it does create a nice diversion and a way of keeping people's attention. Another option is to have a guest speaker or a co-presenter. Cindy and I are doing this today. You're going to hear 2 of us. Actually, we got 3 of us because you've heard Steve already, and now me. So this is engaging, and a different voice, a different face, that kind of thing can also help keep people's attention, especially if they can't see the person. The next slide has to do with voice, and I've chosen Martin Luther King on the slide here. He's a most famous orator, I think we can say. But when all they have is your voice, you really do need to pay attention to how you're speaking. You need to communicate with energy, and then that speaks to that standing so that you're breathing properly. And you want your passion to come through. So that's emphasizing key words, that's modulating your voice. All of those things that are even a bit theatrical will work well in a context where they can't actually see you. Another thing you can do is you want to speak at a moderate pace. I call it modulated pace. But you also can use pauses quite effectively. A pause will get people's attention. It'll cause them maybe to look up. But you don't want to pause too long in the virtual context, because particularly if they can't see you and all of a sudden they can't hear you, they may think system has crashed, you've gone away, something's not functioning properly technically. So a second or 2 or maybe 3 you can get away with as a pause to grab attention. But if longer than that, they may think that something's gone wrong. Now we're going to switch over to tips for when they can see you. So this has more to do with how we're looking on the screen. You definitely want to maintain eye contact. You want to look at that camera as much as possible, and that's very hard to do. We all tend to look at ourselves. So I know I'm looking down to the right a little bit here because that's where I am. It's hard to keep looking at that camera, but you definitely want to make sure that you're looking at the screen. I've seen video webinars and things like that where, people are up like this and looking around. Not good practice. You also want to keep your body relatively still. There may be moments when you want to intentionally move on the screen to make a point, but generally in my presentation skills training, I always say that intentional movement attracts, unintentional or random movement distracts. So keep in mind that you don't want a lot of moving around, rocking, anything like that in the screen. And then also this point that you need to raise your gestures a little higher in virtual. If I want you to see my gestures, I have to bring them up here. We don't want them in front of our face. We do want to try to avoid the hands in front of the face. But if I want to count on my fingers, if I want to make a strong point with my hands, I need to bring them into the square. I need to bring them into the picture. The other tips have to do with what you're wearing and also lighting. You might have noticed me move away from my screen a couple minutes ago. It's one of those days in Michigan where we've got sun and clouds and sun and clouds, and I have a window here. When the sun is bright, I need to lower the shade and have my lamp here in order to create the best lighting I can come up with in my office. But when that sun goes in, then it becomes too dark. So I've got to open that again, which is what I was doing there. So you can have to play with your lighting. You can see in this picture, they've got windows in front and the light shining here. That would create a nice lighting. You want light in front of you, not in back of you. If you're backlit, if you've got a window behind you or a light behind you, all your audience is going to see is dark face. They're not going to be able to see your features or you well. So even if you're just attending a meeting, I would say try to organize yourself so that you're lit from the front instead of from the back, because it's very distracting to look at a little square where you've just got kind of this glow and a dark image in the picture. You also do want to pay attention to what's behind you. I have, Cindy has a nice blank wall, and Steve has a wall with a logo on it. I've got my bookshelf behind me, which ties into what I do for a living. So I don't put up an artificial one. Some people do use artificial. The risk is that you look really weird. I'm sure you've seen it where when the person moves, their head disappears, or they take a drink with their cup and their arm disappears. You have to really think about what other people are seeing and how distracting it's going to be to the people viewing your image. So some of those things can work well. Some of the virtual backgrounds, I've seen some of them that are, I don't know if they're higher quality or if what's behind the image is better, but it can work, but just remember or think about what people are going to see. My last tip is the smile. You definitely want to smile when you're presenting virtually or when you're in virtual communication. Keep in mind, the brain does not have all of those other signals to judge your mood or figure out how you're feeling. So it's important to make people feel at ease and comfortable. And often the smile is what we do that with. We don't want to grin like an idiot, obviously through the whole thing, but smiling at appropriate moments is pay a little more attention to it so that you're not coming across as overly serious, because people won't be able to judge that as well in virtual. So that's my last slide. So it's now my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Cindy Miller, and she's going to be sharing the essentials for leading virtually. Take it away, Cindy.
Thank you, Barbara. I took a page of notes. I learned a great deal, so thank you for that. I'll try and incorporate everything I learned in the next 20 minutes that I have to talk to you about leading teams. These are people that you know. How do we do that better virtually? If you Google work from home, you might get inspired by the images that Google gives you back. You can look forward to a different work attire. You can feel good about being closer to those people and pets that you love. And yeah, maybe you have a little bit more flexibility, presumably. The reality is that working from home gives many distractions a chance to thrive, whether it's hunger, television sets, video games, kids, music, lawn services, like Barbara mentioned, we get distracted. In fact, Bloomberg recently reported that we're spending as many as 3 hours more working virtually from home than even when we were working from home before the stay-at-home orders took in place, before coronavirus hit our shores. With that in mind, that begs that perhaps we're a bit distracted by some of this virtual at-home environment. So it's important for us to rely more on emotional intelligence as we work closer with our teams. Next slide, Steve, please. Emotional intelligence has never been more important. Not only do I have to be self-aware of my own desires for breaks and things like that, but I also have to be aware of my relationship with others, because I'm not seeing those people in the office anymore. Two things that we need to be thoughtful about when it comes to communication. Number one, we want to communicate with our teams consistently. So we'll talk about the cadence of that communication in a bit. Secondly, we want to be able to connect with those individuals on a deeper, more emotional level. How in the world do I do that? I don't even like talking about feelings in the workplace. And now, what does that mean? So let's talk through that for a moment. The 3 V's. If we roll back what we know about communication, we know that communication begins with the words that come out of our mouth, flavored by the tone of our voice. Barbara went into how important that is on these virtual meetings, to vary the tone, vary the pace. Be interesting with your tone of voice. And then there's that visual component that is a bit easier when we're in an office space, sharing that space, because I unconsciously pick up on cues that you're doing, that you're showing me through your facial expressions in your body, that all of a sudden I'm missing. Why am I missing it? Because here's what we see. Next slide, Steve. We see either nothing at all or these staged photos when we're looking at our best. But what's going on behind the scenes could be a lot different. We've got some people that are happy with what they're doing. Other people have anxiety, they're mad, they're fearful, they're sad. All kinds of things are going on. So how do I connect? Because sometimes I can't have my video on. And sometimes even when I do, you might not know that I'm disengaged. Here's a tool that you can use that my friend and leadership consultant, Julie Reed, taught me, and I want to share it with you. Steve? It's called the mood meter. You may recognize this row of emojis because you've seen it at the doctor's office. Tell me how bad the pain is. Point to the image that best describes your pain. So before you're engaging with your team, whether it's your weekly staff meeting or whatever time frame that you are meeting, take a moment, and it doesn't take long at all. Where are you on this mood meter and why? So what does that do? It immediately gives us an indication of where that person is. And the more often that you do it and the more authentic you lead your team through this exercise, the more comfortable they will be in telling you the good, the bad, and the ugly in between, because people are afraid. Even if you were working from home prior to the coronavirus, we have the economic crisis, the health crisis, a social crisis, and there's a lot of fear out there. Fear I may lose my job, fear I might get sick, a family member might get sick. I fear that my kids are going to go back to school. I fear that my kids are never going to go back to school. I have all of this anxiety. So why is that important for us to discuss? Well, how we feel about our situations either expands our ability to be engaged in our work, or it distracts from it. So if I'm fearful, if I've got a lot of anxiety, I am not going to be the best problem solver. I'm not going to be my most creative. And guess what? I'm probably not going to tell you about it because it's my stuff and I'm all alone here in my virtual space. Here's what we do know. We know that the longer it takes for an issue or a problem to occur and for it to be resolved by those that can actually do something about it, the more my relationship, the more my team structure, the more my organization is going to deteriorate. So I want to shorten that lag as much as possible. And here are some things that can help you to do that. In addition to communication encompassing those 3 V's, we've got to keep in mind now with this environment to be transparent, to show empathy, and to allow for some space. How do I do that? Let's talk about transparency first. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Not my quote. Some very smart person mentioned that long ago. Steve, please, next slide. We know as working professionals that to speak and write well is Crucial. Steve said in his opening, communication is the linchpin to our effectiveness. We have to be clear. We have to take out words and phrases in the emails that we're sending that are really not necessary. And this is especially true, as Barbara could tell you, when you're working with global teams. In that environment, it's crucial that we be direct, concise, thorough. What's my call to action? And being courteous also means leave the sarcasm, leave the passive aggressive tone out of our language. That's not only being courteous, it's being clear as well. So, okay, I get this. And just so you know, that hasn't changed, and it's equally as important, if not more, now that everybody's in a virtual place. Next slide. Listening with heart is where we've got to add that layer to our transparency, because remember, I'm trying to connect with you on an emotional level. Write down these key phrases that you could hear yourself saying to people on your team, or even people in your family. Hey, I'm really curious about that project that you just worked on. What happened? Walk me through the process that you used to come to that conclusion. I've got these set of assumptions. I believe that I have 20 minutes to speak, and that you have 20 minutes to speak today. What are your assumptions? I particularly like the last bullet. I don't know. I don't know about you, but when I started out in the corporate work environment, saying I don't know was the kiss of death. Well, what do I need you around for if you don't know? And now it's good, because we can talk about, here's what I do know. Here's where I know our strengths lie. This is what we're good at. Here's what I don't know. I'm not exactly sure when we're going to be back in the office. It might be the end of the year. It might be before that. It might be after that. But here's where we need to be consistently working. So use those to have that conversation. And as we're having those conversations, we can exercise empathy. Brene Brown said, empathy is connecting to the emotions that underpin the experience. In other words, do I know how the other person is handling this project, this experience of working virtually and what have you? She says that you've got to become a listener and a student. You have to stay curious in order to be exercising empathy. Because if this is what's going through your head, oh, that's stupid. Well, why would she be afraid about that? Or what is she doing worried about that? Or I would never do that. You're judging. That's not empathy. We want to pretend that we know nothing, and you're giving me all of that information the first hand. When you're doing that, do I feel what you're feeling? Do I know what you're going through? Then I'm exercising empathy, and I'm really connecting with you. And any personality style can do that, and it's a skill that we can all develop and nurture. Next slide, please. So we talked about transparency. All right, that's important. I need to enrich that being, go back, thank you, Steve. I need to enrich that transparency effort by applying more empathy as much as possible. And now I'm in this area of space. So there was transparency, empathy, and space. This space has been, the natural breaks that we used to have in our work and in our personal life, they've been erased, haven't they? At least they have for me. I used to have a commute some days in the week where I could get in my car, I could catch up on news or maybe make a phone call, or gosh, just sit there and think and listen to music before I got to my next assignment. Now I don't have that. I don't have the opportunity to sit around in an office and catch up with my coworkers. I can't even exercise where I used to. I've got to create new routines. If you're a leader of people, or you're coaching others who are leaders of people, encourage them to create new routines that allow people to have natural breaks. So you can work hard, take a break. Work hard, take a break, go exercise. Now it's time for me to have some communication with other family members or coworkers, etc. And so while we stay on here, the other part that's missing, well, actually, I take that back. According to that chart Steve showed, it's not missing. Meetings. We're really good at making sure those transfer from an online setting to a virtual setting, aren't we? If you had bad meetings when you were face-to-face and you haven't changed anything, then they're actually worse on a virtual platform. I believe, and I don't think I'm alone, people have researched this, that it's not that we don't like meetings, we just don't like what happens during the meetings. When we want to create space for our teams to feel engaged and confident and safe to take risks, and which might only be raising a problem to you, we want to make sure that they can stay focused on the key priorities. Next slide, Steve. So on a daily or, no, this is on a, this is on a weekly basis. If you are leading people, ask 2 questions during the week. What are the 3 most important things you have to do next week, and how can I help? Transparency, empathy, space. What are the 3 most important things you have to do next week? Why next week? Well, it's anticipatory, isn't it? I'm looking forward. I'm not necessarily giving you feedback about what you did the last 5-7 days. I want to know what's ahead, because this is something I can change. This is something I could coach you with. And that's where I'm connecting. How can I help them? Now I've got clarity about what it is that I'm supposed to do. Next slide. Some teams choose to do a daily or a weekly huddle, or they'll call it a check-in. This is a type of meeting, but it happens very quickly. It should only take 5 minutes, 10 if you've got a larger team. The team gathers at a set time every morning. So it's nice when everyone's on the same or within 1 or 2 hours of the same time zone. And they take turns sharing what they're working on for that day. In other words, what are my top 2 or 3 priorities? And that's it. So everyone on the team knows exactly what the other person is accountable for doing. I think I might be delayed in doing this if I don't get the supplies in at time. Okay, let me know and I can help you with that. So the team has a little, they fit the day's puzzle of things going on that are moving them forward, all in place so everyone is aware what the other person is doing. There's clarity around that, real transparency. Here's something that you could use to summarize your experiences and your takeaways after a longer meeting. If you've got meetings that are running a little rough, they're on the longer side, and by that I mean they're 1.5 hours, 2 hours, then at the end of that meeting, take just a little longer for everyone to be quiet and answer some questions. They don't have to be these questions here. This is just a proposal. You take the ones that fit your environment and leave the rest. Incorporate those that you need. So what am I leaving with exactly? What do I have to do in the next coming days, next hour, next week, and so forth? What are my next steps? Is there anything that I'm not considering as I move forward? And then what assumptions am I making? Well, I'm making an assumption that Barbara was going to go first and that she was going to leave me 20 minutes to do my presentation. Okay, so then you share that at the end of the meeting. Go back there just for a moment. Thank you. Nope. Yep, thanks. So when we take a few moments of silence at the end of our meetings and ask people to summarize these things, even if they've gone to the refrigerator, they've gone to the bathroom, they've let the dog out, they've answered 10 other emails, you have a concentrated amount of time where it's reviewed so everyone walks away knowing what was expected. I invite you to practice that. And here's why it's important. We want to create resilience in our work teams and in our cultures. And resilience isn't about being rigid. It's about being strong in the wake of all of these changes that are happening. This image is of Clyde Beatty, who amazed the world back in the mid-1930s when he would enter a ring with a wild lion or more, equipped with a short stick and a chair. Now notice the direction that the chair is. He would point this chair out at the lion or lions at random with the 4 legs showing outward. And that was the key. That was the trick. Because if he kept putting it out there in front of the lion's face, the lion didn't know which leg to stay focused on. He didn't know which one of those pieces of wood was going to attack him first. When he couldn't focus on any one leg, he became stone, confused, couldn't move. To the audience, it looked like that lion was tame and calmed down. So how many chairs are held in front of your face right now? And how many chairs are the teams that you're leading? How many chairs do they have in front of their face? It's our job. This is what we can do with our communication, continuous, that's focused, with huddles or just expectations shared with transparency, empathy, and space to say, focus on this. I know there's a lot going on, but here's what's important. When you do that for your teams, they can take a big breath all the way from their diaphragm, as Barbara says, and say, I got this. And we hope that that helps you to lead more effectively, present more effectively as we move through the world virtually.
Thank you, Barbara and Cindy, for sharing your gifts with our community. I am always humbled at seeing the content that you bring to this, and I need some advancement of slide training apparently. So hopefully I don't disturb you there too much. So as we do some closing comments here, we have a few more minutes. I have 1 or 2 slides sort of on what do you do with this, but feel free to type in the chat if there's something we didn't cover today that you would like us to answer as it relates to the content here, and we can turn over to Barbara and Cindy to answer those. So quickly, so what do you do with all this? So we know communication is important. We know, virtual communication is something that we're all learning. How do we embed it into our organization? One suggestion, and we're seeing this with our organizations right now, is for those leaders that this is a very critical part of their job right now, give them individual leadership coaching. Give them a communications coach. You don't need a full leadership coach with a 360 assessment. Give them a person like a Barbara or Cindy that can help them unpack how do they go through each day with the 10 meetings they may have and do this work better. I think that will pay dividends. Second is to train leaders and employees. Specifically think about those mid-level leaders that might be missing this skill, that if they just communicated a little bit better when they had these virtual meetings, that it would make a great impact. And I'll share with you a couple of content areas we think are important. The third is work with teams. We've been surprised, honestly, personally, I've been surprised at how well executive team development has gone in a virtual setting. Being able to work with an intact work team that are all working remote, they're all on little tiles like we're doing today, and they're unpacking how the team works, and they're being vulnerable, and they're being authentic, and they're communicating, and we can do an assessment and debrief it with the coach. So get an executive team to practice this to build their functionality, but it's also helping them practice how to be present even when they're not physically present. And then the last is organizational development. One of the things we've been saying through this whole webinar series is the world is going to be different. Think about your organization, and we can't tell you exactly what your organization needs to achieve to accomplish its future goals, but understand those and embrace that change and be the best at whatever that new thing is. If it is working virtually, then learn how to do it in a best-in-class way. If that's figuring out how to get back into an office and office share, then figure that out, but don't just let it pass by. Get ahead of this. As it relates to those 4 areas, these are some of the training classes, whether you unpack these individually with a team or in a leadership or group development program, that we offer that we think you guys might want to consider doing. The first few are related to communication, but the remainder of them are other areas related to, as Cindy mentioned, the importance of emotional intelligence and mindset that somebody brings to the work that they do. So let me just do one housekeeping item, and then I'll pause and we can see what questions came up here. So before we close, I wanted to let you know that our next 2 webinars are already set, and Lauren will send you in the chat links to each of those. Similar to this format, our next one is going to be on resilience and well-being. We have 2 of our Dion leadership coaches and facilitators that specialize in that space, that develop that content. And I think you'll find a great treat of them helping you unpack their expertise in what does resilience and well-being look like and mean. And I think it's complementary to what we saw here today. The one after that will be on using 360 assessments and why do we think that's an important thing to do right now as it relates to development, and how do you do development while we're still working virtually and remotely. You can see the dates on those. We're trying to run those every couple weeks. So just wanted to let you know that as well. Last, we just recently released a publication on the case for leadership coaching during COVID. So I just wanted to point you to that. You'll be seeing an email, and if you're on our LinkedIn, you'll see that there. But we actually went out and surveyed about 100 of the past coachees we've had and found some great insight about what they've learned and how they're navigating the world differently now because of their coaching. Gives you some information and ammunition to hopefully get coaching in your organization. And then recently it was picked up through an article we did for CEO World magazine as well. And we talked about our leaders and managers, essential workers really, as they do the hard work that we've talked about today. So that's the closing areas. We have a few comments, so let me pause here and turn it back over to Barbara and Cindy as they're observing the chat, and feel free to jump in to answer any questions or comments.
I didn't really see any questions. Cindy, did you?
I'm just scrolling through now. I do not. Oh.
Yeah, I'm not really
Comment is about, I will say too, we didn't say this up front, but Lauren will send out the link to this recording so you have the PowerPoint with this and the commentary as well. So that'll be going out within next, probably before the end of the day.
Yeah, and you can always reach out to Dion Leadership with any questions that might come up in the future, and we can we'd be happy to respond.
Great. Well, it sounds like we did a good job of packaging it together. There's no other additional questions. Thanks everybody for taking your time with us today. We look forward to seeing you on another webinar. And if there's anything we can do in the interim, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you navigate the crazy world we're all living in right now.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.